In this video I'm going to go over cutting dovetails using power tools without using a commercial jig. To get started we'll have to cut a straight edge on a backer board. Here I'm using 5/4 poplar, but you could also use a 2x6 or even a 2x4. Next I'll be cutting the guides. I'll just cut these out of 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood. These 3 boards will be used for the pinboard jig. These dovetails will use a 1:6 ratio, so I'm transferring this angle to the backer board. The distance between these 2 lines is arbitrary. You can make them the size of your tails, or you can make them a little bit bigger or smaller and then slide the jig back and forth to hog out the area. You'll see when we start making them. I start by drilling 1 hole and putting 1 screw in, and then I use the T-bevel to adjust my angle and make sure it's correct. And then I place the 2nd screw in. And here I'm using finished trim screws that have a really small head, and I bury that below the surface because the router will ride along this guide. And I do the same for the 2nd guide. Next I install the guide template bushing. This is a Bosch router and it requires this holder to be installed in the base. So I screw this in. Then I install the 1/2 inch collet because I'm using a 1/2 inch bit. And here I get confused on how to put the guide bushing in because it has been a while since I'd done it. I have the guide bushing in. Then I use a centering pin to make sure the bushing is centered on the router. So you put this in the collet, and then you loosen the screws on the template and you center it, and then you tighten the screws on the plate, and it will center that guide bushing. And then we remove the centering pin. I installed a 1/2 inch bit in the router. It doesn't matter exactly what size bit you're using, it just needs to fit inside the bushing. And now I'm adjusting the height. So I have my jig upside down and I'm taking the thickness of the tailboard and holding it up, and I'm adjusting the stop on the router so the blade just hits the top of that board. And this can be a little tricky, so you may want to adjust this after you make your first test cuts. Now I have the jig in a workmate, and I'm taking my router and I'm cutting into the backer board just a little bit. Here I'm roughly laying out the lines for the pin board just to give me an idea of where I want to cut. Now I'll place it in the jig up against the backer board, and I'll line up the left side cut with the cut mark from the router. To lay out the tailboard, I'll set a marking gauge to the thickness of the pinboard, and then I'll mark a line all the way around the tailboard. This includes the ends. Next, I'll set the pinboard on the tailboard, and I'll make sure that the tails are oriented the proper way so they don't just fall right out. I'll line the board up with the mark I made with the marking gauge, and then I'll transfer the tails to the tailboard from the pinboard. It's a good idea to also mark the waist so you don't accidentally cut the tails off. To cut the tails, I'll be using a jigsaw, and I'll be using a T101AO blade. It's a clean for wood blade, and it makes a very clean cut. I've clamped the workpiece in my workmate, and I'll be cutting these out with the jigsaw. I try and cut just on the waist side of the line. You could also cut these out on a bandsaw or a scroll saw, and that would actually probably work a little bit better. I'm now ready to try and fit the dovetail together. It's a little bit of a tight fit. The fit is a little tight, so I'm going to cut away a little bit more on the tailboard from the opposite side. The blade probably skewed just a little bit during the cut. The dovetail came out pretty tight, although you'll see the tail is recessed just a little bit. So to remedy this, you'd want to move the marking gauge inward a little bit more. You can also adjust the depth of the router bit if you need to make the pinboard a little bit deeper. There's a little bit of tear out there also. To remedy that, when you cut your pinboard, you want to do a little bit of a back route as your first cut, a very shallow back cut, and then cut into the joint, and then that'll eliminate tear out on that. You can also use a marking gauge to score the wood, but then you'll see your score marks, and you may or may not want that. I use this technique on the dovetails on this chest of drawers I made a few years ago. It worked pretty well. The most difficult part was transferring the pinboard to the tailboard, but otherwise it was the same technique I used in this video. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you would like to see more videos, please subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching.